the US, the UK and France attacked alleged chemical facilities in Syria last April 14. This made clearer the relevance of a leftist alternative to the military regimes in the region. Every project that is neither supportive of Bashar al-Assad and his allies, Iran and Russia, nor supportive of the Syrian rebels and their European and US allies, is purported to be a danger by the neighboring countries. However, the Kurds of Syria, even as they have been left alone by the pro-Assad forces and the anti-ISIS international coalition, have kept fighting their existential war against the Turkish authorities. The Turkish army entered into the Afrin canton last March 18, as the conclusion of the Operation Olive Branch that began last January 20. It seems that the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, engaged in strengthening his links with Tehran and Moscow, considers, both internally and externally, a pro-workers, pro-ecology, pro-women liberation and communalist movement to be an even greater threat than ISIS. Here, the region speaks to Dilar Dirik, activist of the Kurdish women movement, in order to better understand which would be the future of the Rojava project in this context of armed war. Pro-Turkish rebels are ruling Afrin. Can we argue that the Rojava dream is ending? Not at all. The resistance in Rojava is still strong. After 58 days of resistance in Afrin, the YPG fighters decided to transform the nature of the war into a guerrilla struggle. Therefore, the resistance did not surrender, but changed in nature due to the severe circumstances, especially concerning the hundreds of thousands of forcibly displaced people. This has been only a battle within the war for the forces in Rojava. For the Kurdish militants, Rojava is an idea, a political project that has influenced hundreds of thousands of people. Time has not passed in vain. A culture of radical democracy established itself in Afrin over the last 7 years. An inevitable military withdrawal does not mean that the experiment of democratic autonomy will not go on. The population might go back to Afrin after a while, and their project may be even more radical. When the Kobane inhabitants have been forced to leave their town because the ISIS jihadists occupied it, after YPG defeated ISIS, they went back and created more democratic structures. The same might happen in Afrin. Why has the international community abandoned the Kurds again? Those who have betrayed the people in Afrin are not the true international community. We should make a distinction between the true civil international community that rallied everywhere around the globe for Afrin, in Afghanistan, Japan, South Africa as well. In other words, there has been a mobilization for Afrin even in countries where there is no Kurdish community. The international community of states abandoned the Kurds instead. However, the word abandoned might be misleading. The Kurdish freedom movement in Rojava and beyond never counted on international support for true liberation in the first place, and we all knew very well that U.S. support was only a tactical, military alliance, which would eventually conclude in the U.S. continuing their imperialist, profit-oriented agenda. We knew that as soon as ISIS as the so-called common enemy would be defeated, the Kurds, without any status, would be left alone, leaving them vulnerable to all sorts of hostility. The Democratic Federation of Northern Syria and all of the previous formations from Rojava were not invited to the international conferences on Syria, in order to appease Turkey. Turkey is a strategic NATO ally and a major actor in the region, maintaining relations with the most important players in an opportunistic manner. Considering the nature of the hegemonic international order, nobody could expect that a leftist, alternative revolution with a central role for women and institutionalized coexistence of all people would be tolerated by the geopolitical powers. Although tactical military cooperation was deemed useful by both the US and Russia, it is more than naive to think that this would necessarily translate to support on the political level. The attacks on Afrin by the Turkish state and its allies clearly demonstrate this contradiction. The Turkish attacks took place with Western complicity. Italy, the UK, US, Germany and others produce and sell the weapons to Turkey that target the Kurdish people in Afrin and beyond. At the same time, the invasion of Afrin was a direct policy of Russia to force the Afrin administration to hand over the area to Assad and his bloodthirsty forces. Although these different actors may oppose each other on other levels, they act in accordance when it comes to suppressing alternatives to the status quo ruled by states and their imperialist, authoritarian interests. They need for the war to continue in order to spread chaos in the Middle East and especially to further maintain the arms industry. The state's hawkish foreign policies help them further legitimize authoritarian anti-democratic domestic policies. Their aim is to prevent any kind of leftist revolution or leftist political project from materializing, domestically and internationally. The numbers are clear enough. The Turkish attacks brought about hundreds of casualties while a UN ceasefire on Syria had been imposed. For this reason, can we say that Erdogan is a war criminal? Erdogan is a war criminal, and he does not hide it. He recruited jihadist groups to commit atrocities in Afrin for his invasion, occupation, and he has a legacy of supporting jihadist forces in Syria against the Kurdish people. These pro-Turkish forces illegally invaded Afrin with the silence of the international system and committed war crimes, murders, tortures and lootings. They even recorded and published documentation of their crimes on social networks. This is how confident they are about not being held accountable internationally. Consider Erdogan's own words, "We will clear this land from terrorists and give it back to its legitimate owners." He constantly repeated that he will not stop in Afrin and advance to the Iraq-Syria border. Using a vocabulary of ethnic cleansing, he defines all Kurds as terrorists and wants to move them from the north of Syria to create a buffer zone, which is in reality a colonialist annexation. He installs foreigners as the new administration of Afrin. These are people who have nothing to do with the area and do not enjoy any form of popular legitimacy. Erdogan wants to annex Afrin just like Jarablus and illegally subjugate it to administration under the Turkish state. This is clear from the nationalist symbolism used in the occupation. The invaders hoisted Turkish flags everywhere in Afrin, changed local names and demolished the statue of Kawa, a symbol of the Kurdish resistance. Thus, while claiming to fight terrorism, they in fact deliberately destroy Kurdish culture. And of course they want to eradicate the democratic project of Rojava. Erdogan wants to make it seem like Arabs and Turks are jointly fighting against the Kurds, but in fact, in Rojava, for years the different ethnic and religious communities, Arabs, Syriacs, Turkmens and Armenians have been fighting shoulder to shoulder with the Kurds against all sorts of attacks. Erdogan's nationalist, fascistic fantasies do not correspond to the stories of people's solidarity on the ground in Rojava and beyond. Erdogan, as the Syrian Ba'ath Party has done in the 60s, want to change the demographics of northern Syria in order to control and dominate the Kurds. With this same aim, the Turkish army destroyed entire regions in northern Kurdistan, southeast Turkey over the last years and committed massacres of civilians in Sis, Sur and Nusaybin for example. In a nutshell, Erdogan considers unbearable a revolutionary system on majority Kurdish lands within or close to Turkish borders. It is a shame that the decision-makers who claim to defend human rights and international law deliberately refrain from defining him as a war criminal despite all the evidence. The biggest disaster is the high number of refugees and displaced people due to the Turkish attacks. How is it possible that the EU confirmed the second tranche of €3 billion in aid to Turkey in this context? There are more than 300,000 displaced people after the Turkish attacks. Erdogan is using refugees to blackmail Europe. He promised European authorities that Turkey would keep the refugees within its territory. However, he is creating thousands of new refugees himself through his wars and thus is able to continue threatening Europe with a perceived immigrant invasion. In addition, he is using this, deliberately engaging in politics to divide the refugees and trigger clashes among Arabs and Kurds in Syria and Turkey. There is plenty of evidence of Erdogan trying to indoctrinate vulnerable refugees to act in his interest. On the other hand, hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people and refugees, even from Iraq, found a safe haven in Rojava. It is for this reason that the Afrin population doubled in last years. Until the Turkish invasion, Afrin was the safest place in Syria for displaced people. Now people have been removed from there and are awaiting humanitarian aid in vain. At the moment, the Kurdish people have no place left to turn, unless they want to compromise the ideals that thousands of people have fought and died for. No international organization or institution is genuinely invested in finding a solution for Syria and holding war criminals accountable. While Assad's war crimes are discussed on international platforms and rightfully talked about in the media, the illegal Turkish invasion, following Turkey's brutal massacres in northern Kurdistan are simply tolerated by the global powers because of its NATO membership and flirting with the power bloc around Russia. None of the institutions play their role. Therefore, citizen action is required to put an end to the Turkish war machine. Considering all of this, the Kurdish movement and solidarity groups have asked to begin a campaign to boycott Turkey.